To bring the May State Board of Education meeting in the afternoon back to order. Welcome everybody back. We've got a few new folks on here, so we'll be moving on in the afternoon session to our next agenda item, which is an action item. It is to act on the early childhood strategic plan. Amanda, I believe you're on, and I think I saw Melissa there also. So we'll turn it over to Amanda, and looks like a PowerPoint is up. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We are so pleased to be here with you today to bring you the Early Childhood Strategic Plan, the All In for Kansas Kids Strategic Plan. We had the chance to visit about this in our process when we met in April, and so I won't rehash all of that. We know that more than 6,000 Kansans contributed to our needs assessment, which really allowed us to dig deep into our state early childhood system. And we then collaborated with very many Kansans from very many different sectors to be able to develop this plan. So I hope that you all enjoyed reviewing it as much as we enjoyed putting it together. I really appreciate all of the work that the board has done to support this effort to get us to this point. As a quick reminder, if folks are following along at home, they can visit the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund website, kschildrenscabinet.org, to be able to download and read the strategic plan, and we hope that they'll do so. There they will find both a primer on the Kansas early childhood system and some key values that helped outline the plan. They'll also find the 7 goals that we have for this plan and additional information for each one of those goals in terms of the strategies and tactics that we'll engage to make it a reality. This is a 5-year plan covering 2020 through 2024. We hope that the state board will choose to accept it today. The Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund on April 24th voted to adopt and accept the strategic plan so that we can move it forward in the state. I do have one really exciting piece of news to share. And I appreciate all of your patience as we waited to have this good news to share. We were able to announce last week that Kansas has been awarded nearly $9 million in funding to be able to put this plan into action. So we knew that we were very committed to doing the goals that we had outlined in the strategic plan, regardless of whether or not we received this federal funding. But the additional funds certainly will not hurt. We had originally applied for this grant way back in the fall of 2019, and we did not, it was a very competitive process. We did not make the cut for the first round of states that were awarded, but then Congress in December voted to authorize about $25 million of additional funding for this program. And so Kansas, Nebraska, and South Carolina were each funded at a little bit less than what we had originally requested. When we were together last in April, we visited about the statutory role that the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund plays in advising the governor on implementing a comprehensive coordinated system for early childhood in Kansas, and also for facilitating interagency collaboration. Given that, the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund is the lead agency, both for this next round of the preschool development grant, birth through 5, and also is the entity that we in the strategic plan outline as being the prime accountable body for making sure that we proceed according to the plan and that we move it forward. Of course, individual agencies within the plan have responsibility over different activities and strategies that we outline. So the state board will continue to have a very important role in making sure that we are advancing early childhood in Kansas. And we are also very pleased that the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund is stepping into this role as lead agency for the next round of the grant. This is authorized, as a reminder, by the Every Student Succeeds Act. The grant that we've received, the first year runs April 30th of this year through April 29th of next year, and we are hopeful that Congress will continue to reauthorize this program so that we can continue to receive funding for 2 additional years beyond the grant, so for a total of about $27 million over the 3-year course of the program, should Congress take that action. Of these funds, a large portion, about $2 million, will be flowing through directly to communities for subgrants to be able to do everything from improving the quality of childcare that's available in the state to implementing policies specifically targeted at rural areas to make sure that those areas can build infrastructure and capacity and meet the needs of the early childhood system. We'll also be able to invest in some state level initiatives that will better position us to implement this coordinated comprehensive system. So we'll be able to do things like develop a registry of early childhood professionals in the state to be able to better manage the workforce that we have available. I am sure that all of you have a number of questions about the plan and as you were reviewing it. And so I want to take the time to be able to have us be able to have some conversation and discussion and then allow the board to act if you so choose. As a reminder, folks can get engaged and stay up to date on this work, and we hope that they'll do so by visiting the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund website, where we send out regular email updates and where we host regular webinars to continue to gather feedback and stay connected with the field. And that's something that we'll continue to do over the course of the next several years. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board to see what questions we might have or to be able to dive in deeper on any areas of the strategic plan that you'd like.
Okay, thank you very much for that update, Amanda. Appreciate that. And so this money that you've received, the announcement today is almost $9 million, and that is from federal grant dollars, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It's authorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act.
And that is for how many years?
Up to 3.
Up to 3, okay.
Yep.
All right, so those are federal dollars that have just been allocated by Congress.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, and I believe that Ann Maw had a question, so Ann? You're good.
We're good. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda, so the other 7 million besides the 2 million that goes to communities going to go to state initiatives or somewhere else?
Yes, and I'll actually turn it over to Melissa in just a minute to be able to dive in deeper on the individual components of the plan, but we'll be able to continue the state level work that we've raised, that we've outlined. So everything from updating IT systems to be able to have better integrated data and be able to support the workforce, training and professional development, and supports to communities to help them put this plan into action. Melissa, would you like to add anything to that?
She's waving her fingers.
Yeah.
There.
Okay, you're unmuted, Melissa. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. We are really excited at the goals that we've outlined in the strategic plan that we can actually take action on using these federal dollars. The framework of the preschool development grant guidance is such that we are supposed to direct it into the implementation of some of the systemic projects, the infrastructure improvements that were identified as necessary through our needs assessment and outlined in the strategic plan. So it's to set things up in the system to better serve the individual programs in the communities. But we are not supposed to fund additional slots for kids with this money. So we have a lot of work to do that is already actually, we got underway with our planning grant funding, and now this is a big relief to be able to continue the work and get to some completion. We anticipate creating in this first year the workforce registry that Amanda mentioned. We're hard at work on improvements to the 1-800-Children universe, the resource and referral system. We want to strengthen it. We want to put more modern technology behind it and really beef it up as a statewide resource that can be accessed by all communities, by all parents and providers. So that work is underway, and there's some really exciting improvements that we'll be able to unveil, I think, pretty quickly this summer. We are working on an integrated early childhood data system to help us better share and connect the data across the agencies involved. It's already being connected. We've talked a lot about the shortcomings of that. So it's that kind of work. There are other examples, but it will be for the benefit of the system as a whole, but it's addressing some much needed infrastructure improvements.
Yeah, I mean, it is all about systemic change, but when you look at our strategic plan and you see something like, oh, every parent will have access to quality, affordable childcare, that ain't going to happen with $9 million or wishing it. I mean, do we have champions around the state who are taking this on to make it happen in the communities? Because it takes a long time to change the system.
You are absolutely correct, and I appreciate you pointing that out. One of the areas in the strategic plan that we identified was the need to create a more robust state-level public-private partnership. And through the Governor's Education Council, that work is underway. There has been a subcommittee chaired most recently by Joe Reardon and Dr. Craig Carell that are working on proposals to put together a collaborative project with the world of philanthropy and business leaders and marry the funding that they have in their sectors with public dollars to help expand the actual reach of programs and serve more of our children. So that is a companion project that is working in alignment with this focused work that we're doing on the infrastructure. So we're not alone in trying to expand the reach of our system and make sure that every child that, with a family that wants access and every child that needs services can access those services.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ben Jones has a question. Okay, you're good, Ben. Go ahead.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, again, want to thank all the work that Melissa and Amanda and that whole team has done over the last, I guess, year and a half now of working on it. I think it's important to say that this is not a grant to develop a government-funded early education system in the state of Kansas. It is to grow that either publicly or privately, whatever is available in that community. I've got communities that they have a robust private sector in early childhood, and they want to keep it that way. And I think it's a great thing. Allowing the private sector to flourish is a great thing. So I appreciate all the work that they're doing. And Madam Chair, I move that the Kansas State Board of Education accept the All In for Kansas Kids strategic plan.
Okay, we have a motion for the action. Do we have a second? And then we'll continue with questions. Second by Jean Clifford. Okay, other questions, board members? Okay, I would just like to reiterate, I mean, I think it's important what Ben said. It's also important what Ann said. But this particular set of dollars, at least I think, Amanda, you said about 7 million of it is really going to go for infrastructure. And maybe one of you can answer this for me, because this really is an interagency effort. And so how many agencies are we talking about are involved in this? I'm sure it's quite a few.
Thank you for that question. The core team is 4 agencies. So you all representing the Department of Education with Amanda running point as the early childhood director, the Department of Children and Families, the Department of Health and Environment, and the Kansas Children's Cabinet. But we also have partnerships that we have developed through the course of the work that we're really pleased to be able to express the collaboration that we've seen coming out of the Department of Commerce and to some extent our partners at Board of Regents, and I would flag the courts and the Corrections Department. They have seats on the Children's Cabinet, so we have worked throughout the past year to draw the other partners in that we need to across the system to really be focused holistically on all of this work. And so it's been gratifying, and we look forward to strengthening those relationships with the work ahead of us.
Very good. Thank you. So this will, and you'll probably be giving us regular updates on your progress, I'm assuming.
Well,
I'm sure the board will appreciate that. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'm going to call for a vote. We've had a motion and a second to move for the Kansas State Board of Education to accept the All In for Kansas Kids strategic plan. So all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 8 opposed. Okay, 8-2 with Michelle Dombrowski and Steve Roberts voting against. So thank you both, Amanda and Melissa, for spearheading this work. We do look forward to proceeding with updates as you go. I know there will be a lot of information. Also, just getting information from the Education Council, because the work they're doing is exciting also. So thank you very much. Okay, the next agenda item will be an update from the Special Education Advisory Council. I don't see, oh, there's Bert, I do see him. So we will have an opportunity to have some conversation. We've asked SEAC to give us a little bit more than an annual update. So I believe Bert is here to do that. And then after this update, we'll have an action item on the SEAC transition implementation plan. So I'm sure, Bert, there will be questions on both, but we'll start first with the update and then we'll go into the action item. So welcome, Bert.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it, and thank you for this opportunity to provide an update. I asked Rebecca if she wanted to provide it, and she volunteered me to provide this update for you, so I'll be glad to do so. I have a PowerPoint, and I think someone's going to be uploading that. At least I hope they will, and we'll see if it shows up on the screen. If not, I'll wing it. It was supposed to be there for you and just give you an idea of what we had been talking about since the last time that I reported, or we reported to the board. We did have a meeting in April. It was a virtual meeting. We had 19, I believe, present. We had a wide discussion at that opportunity where we really took a lot of time on the transition table. And we brought that to a vote, and as a SEAC, we approved it, of course, earlier, and then we had decided to continue on with the plan that we would offer a transition summit this summer. We had planned an in-person transition summit originally, but we have since that time moved the transition summit to a virtual opportunity. What we hope to do is select the individuals that we were going to have on site that will be doing video production of the information that they would share, and that includes vocational rehabilitation, KSDE, several other organizations that we're going to partner with us. We're going to make those available to the field prior to the day that we hold this summit. The reason we want to do that is so that districts will have an opportunity to view that information, and then that information can be shared at the local region. And then the day of the summit, we'll do a Q&A, we'll have a keynote, and we'll have opportunities for those that wanted to participate in person to have a conversation with us about the transition table and also about the activities we have planned for the next year, including the pre-ETs through vocational rehabilitation. We also have an opportunity now with Carl Perkins and CTE to work on some students with disabilities being integrated into programs and working within those programs next year. So that's going to be a huge part of our conversation as we move forward from here on. We did move to continue Rebecca Helgett as past chair for one more year, and we had 6 individuals that were leaving us because they have served their 2 terms, are not eligible for another term. And we had 2 individuals that will continue on SEAC because they've only served 1 term and they have an opportunity for 2 terms on SEAC. Ann had asked me a question that I referred on to Laura Jurgensen. This has been several weeks ago about adding another teacher to the SEAC. Well, when we investigated the bylaws for SEAC, we saw an S on the Institutes of Higher Education representatives as well as teachers. So we have hence opened up 2 positions, one for higher education and one for a special education teacher, and we are taking applicants for those 2 positions through this Friday. So we want the board to understand that this was not anything done on purpose. I'm sure there was someone in a role that was serving dual purposes in the past, because we've had to do that where somebody might have taken on a parental role that had been higher education, or we had a teacher that served in another capacity. But we wanted to make sure that at this point in time, when that question was raised by a board member, that we got the membership correct. So we have changed our opportunity and our options for membership to align with what the federal requirements are and what our state plan tells us that we need to be providing. So basically that meeting left us with Heath Piney going to be the chair-elect, and he will be the chair next year. Rebecca Helgett will then serve as the past chair. It was a great opportunity for conversations. Even though it was a virtual opportunity, we did manage to have some deep discussions about waivers. One of the things that we were talking about is, do we as a SEAC group have anything that we agree on as far as asking the federal government for any flexibility or waiver? So we left that meeting with a recommendation that we would send a letter to Washington, D.C., and that we would ask for some flexibilities in timelines. And that's really all we were asking for. We wanted to add some time to evaluations. We wanted to add some time to the IEP meeting requirements. We just wanted to have an extension, if you will, of some flexibility in time. Well, since that time, we received the information from the Secretary of Education that there are no waivers or flexibilities going to be provided to the states in these issues. But I did want the state board to know that we did have a rich conversation, and that we also talked about how we needed to make sure that parents and students were not left out of this conversation, because where we have districts that are asking for things to be waived or flexibilities, we have parents and we have students that are wanting services, and they want those services provided within that IEP framework. So we had a balance, the balance between what's good for parents and students, what's good for school systems, but more importantly, what's good for all. And so we left that meeting, I think, with some really balanced feelings and conversations about what that balance would look like, because we didn't want to waive anything. We didn't want anybody to think we wanted to not serve students with disabilities, because that is what we do. But we also wanted people to understand that those timelines within this pandemic were very difficult to manage, especially under the evaluation. So one of the things that Laura shared with the group was that we were providing some training on the evaluation, and we have done that and provided evaluation training to the field. And we created a communities of practice, which we talked to the group about. Communities of practice is 2 prior state employees who are now working for technical assistance agencies, Alina Lincoln and Jana Rossborough. And both of them have been conducting on Fridays for an hour and a half conversations with directors and administrators across the state about subjects of interest to those directors. And we have done that outside of KSDE being available during those conversations. We wanted to allow the directors to really have a sense of, we can bring anything up, we can talk about anything here, and we can have candid conversations. And it's all based upon a planning theory that we're going to plan accordingly to look at what actions are appropriate and reasonable, and what can we do within this pandemic to ensure that we are providing appropriate services. We had originally planned for that to be 4 sessions, and since that time we've added 5 more, and there's 2 to go. I get on those sessions every Friday at 9 o'clock so that I can provide an update from the state's perspective, respond to any questions, and then I get off so that they can have their private conversations within that technical assistance framework. So we went over that with our SEAC and explained what we were doing there, because several of the things that we went over also are why we have a SEAC. And one of those things is to meet the unmet needs in the state for students with disabilities. We also talked about how we're there to go over rules and regulations. So as we're approaching any rule or reg that we're recommending, take it by SEAC for their consideration and agreement. We also develop evaluations, and we look at evaluation issues through SEAC. Any corrective action that we're recommending in the state goes through SEAC for SEAC to provide us input on what's appropriate for those corrective actions. We also develop and implement policies through SEAC. So SEAC gives us those thoughts and considerations when we have a policy consideration so that we can move forward knowing that we have the group in mind and their approval. And finally, we look at the education of incarcerated students with disabilities in adult prisons. So those are basically our 6 themes that we cover and that we build our agenda around, and we try to keep everyone up to speed on what's happening within the field of special education, specific to how we can improve services for students with disabilities within the state of Kansas. So I'm open to any questions that anyone might want to ask at this point in time.
Thank you, Bert. A couple quick questions I have. So the new members, because you're asking for those to be in by Friday, will that be then voted on in our June meeting?
It should be available to you by June. Yes, that's our hope. Is it will go. We'll have a committee of SEAC go over those applicants, and what we try to do is make sure that we cover all board regions and that we get the best candidates within the board regions that have openings, so that the board is well represented on the Special Ed Advisory Council.
Okay, very good.
So yes,
Thank you.
yes.
My other question is not necessarily about SEAC, but as we are seeing this stay-at-home order, and certainly some of our special ed kids are our most vulnerable, have you been making suggestions to any of our districts as far as maybe some unmet needs for some of these special education students and learning opportunities for some of them maybe this summer? Have you been making recommendations, or have you heard of any plans from some of our districts on what they can do to help these students?
Thank you, Kathy. I'm very glad you brought that up, because that has been a conversation for the last 2 weeks. We've talked about extended school year services. Extended school year was developed so that students would not regress during breaks in services. And most of the time that occurs during the summer break. So districts have planned accordingly in the past by looking at regression recoupment, and within 45 days of the school year beginning, is the student where they were when they left school in May? And that would be called the regression. And if they have not recouped the loss through that first 45 days, they're eligible for extended school year services if you want to look at regulations. So a lot of districts have been looking at that extended school year language and considering what can we do in lieu of this pandemic when we know we have some students with unmet needs. So the conversation has been around what can we do during this time of the pandemic for those students of low incidence or that have extreme behaviors that cannot meet a social distancing requirement because we know that they require close proximity. So is there an opportunity that we can establish to look at for this summer for those types of services? Those conversations are occurring, and we get both sides of the coin. We get those school districts that are preparing for extended school year, and we have other districts that are not providing extended school year to the breadth and depth of what other districts are looking at, because the guidance is regression recoupment. And so some districts are saying we don't have the staff, or we're having a difficult time working within the social distancing framework for our most significant needs students, because they require us to have our hands on them. So then we have to look at what does the county health department say for social distancing, and can we go through our county health and look at providing those more personalized services. And I think that we have school districts that are concerned about what happens if they have a staff member that has this virus or a student that has this virus, and all of a sudden we are transferring the virus from one person to another. So within that consideration, this is a deep discussion. We had 4 pages of comments when we talked about this last Friday. It's going to be continued in conversation this coming Friday. So what I want to say to you is this is a very strong conversation occurring within the state right now. And we're trying to provide some semblance of Q&A for them. So Laura Jurgensen has framed some questions and answers that we went over with them on Friday. And it was really talking about the legal regulations around what's required with extended school year. So we plan to continue to pursue that. And the technical assistance persons, I was on a call with them this morning, they're going to continue the conversation with the directors.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bert. I know that's a concern. We've discussed that at the board, just as far as extra learning opportunities for some of our most at-risk students. So we appreciate hearing that you're working on that. Okay, board members, other questions of Bert as far as the SEAC, the advisory council, and then we'll move on to the next item, which is an agenda item, which is his also. But any other questions for Bert? Okay, Dina Horst has a question. Okay, Dina, you're unmuted.
I wondered if we have received concerns from parents. Do you want us to share that with you or tell them what you've been saying, or how would you like to handle that?
Dina, I think anytime you get a parent call or a parent concern, please bring it to my attention. If it has anything to do with regulation or policy, I will get it to Laura Jurgensen and our team of attorneys, and we provide them with a framework within the legal guidance for that question. And if we need to connect them with the director, because sometimes they deal with a principal or a teacher and they've never talked to the director of special education, then we make that connection for them and we get them connected so they can discuss with the administrator. And then if they really have issues, if they want to file a formal complaint, then we allow them to do that. So refer them to me.
This is more related to their child wasn't responding well to the online learning, and their county had basically said no one-on-one type involvement. So they were concerned about their child losing the space between the regular ed child and their child, that gap getting bigger. And they wanted to see if they could have more learning in the summer that than normal, rather than just keeping up, so that they didn't lose any. And so I will share their concern with you and their contact information. So if you think you need to get in touch with them, I'll let you do that too.
I want for parents to feel supported during this time because they have some real concerns, and they are right to be concerned about the gap. Things that we have heard from the federal government is that at some point in time, we're going to have to assess every one of our students with disabilities and determine what type of gap has been created if they were not provided the supports and services during this time of the pandemic. Then we will have to look at what education opportunities do we need to provide beyond what we normally would. That is something we know we're going to have to do. And so that's going to be coming at a future date.
Okay, Randy had a comment.
Thank you, Dina, and this will be true for all of you, just to let you know. This is what I've said to superintendents. I know that the athletic coaches have been pushing all the superintendents and principals about, when can I start summer camp? When can I have kids in for weights? When can I start to have conditioning? And I've said to them, I would think long and hard about starting any of that before you've reached out to special ed kids and students who you haven't been able to engage. And before you have a plan on how you're going to deal with those kids, I would be reluctant to start bringing back kids for athletics or activities, band, etc., until you have a plan for how you're going to really work with these kids that need help directly. Now that's guidance, Dina, right? They have a local board that determines that, but there's money that was given to all school districts through the COVID-19 funds, the CARE funds. They could use those funds, among other ways, to do that work. And I just think it would send the wrong message to start having 7-on-7 football before you thought about how you're going to help special ed kids, or again, kids that aren't special ed that we just haven't been able to locate or serve during this pandemic. So I just wanted you to know I have given that guidance to superintendents and principals.
Okay, other questions, board members, for Bert before we move on to the transition plan? Okay, seeing none, item 13, the next item is going to be an action item, and it is to look at the CX transition implementation plan. So, Bert, it looks like maybe you've got some information on a PowerPoint here to share with us.
Yes, if we can get to the first slide, if this is what is the first slide, then I'm good to go. But we have visited with the state board at least on 2 occasions about the transition recommendations for the state of Kansas that originated from the task force that Jim Porter and Rocky Nichols had implemented and had worked with at length over the past year or so. So one of the things we did as a special advisory council was have a subcommittee, including Rocky Nichols, that sat down and looked at those recommendations, and we came up with a transition table. It's a working document. That table was designed to ensure that we covered all of the major points that we wanted to cover with school districts for implementing successful transition services for students with disabilities. So what you see here is the link on the KSDE website of how you can get to the transition table itself. So if we can get this slide to move, because I can't do it. So there we go. See, I thought we were at the end instead of at the beginning. So if we could go back to the beginning, maybe I can run through this a little. That was slide 8, I believe, and I don't know that we've gotten to slide 1. Okay, this is back to the CX. See, there was the one I was looking for the last presentation. So let's go back to 8. Let's go to the transition table. So what we're actually asking for is for the board to approve the transition table that we brought to you and went over with you at our last opportunity to visit with you. And it is a comprehensive plan that looks at short-term opportunities, long-term opportunities, and what exists currently. And so we are going to frame that. We're going to work within that to plan our transition summit on July 27th. We are also going to then use it for resource development. And we plan to have a group of individuals, including agency support individuals, to get with us and meet with us soon so that we can build that platform of that interagency collaboration as we look at transition implementation within the state of Kansas. This has been very problematic for us with this pandemic. Transition service in and of itself is looking at those exit outcomes that we want for students with disabilities to access post-secondary education, to access training opportunities, and to access employment. Within this current environment of major unemployment, with universities not knowing what they're going to do in the summer or in the fall, then it's been very difficult for school districts to adapt and to look at what are effective transition plans. They have done assessments, they've worked with the students to the best of their ability, They are planning on these students either accessing employment or future training. It's just when will those opportunities be available? So I want the board to understand that this table is a moving document. And if we need to add to it by adding agency supports or something of that sort to our model, we will do that at a future date and we will bring that to the board. But we feel like approving this transition table gives us a direction to head in, and it also provides that opportunity for that interagency collaboration. So I would ask the board to approve our transition table that we brought to you at the last meeting. And I'm sorry I don't have it on the slide here, but it is I believe it's 15 pages now, and it goes through our action steps that we plan to implement.
Board members, on your agenda, the transition table actually starts on page 38 with training, professional development, and the IEP transition system. And then the next component, as I'm scrolling, goes to systems change and coordination, and that's on page 46. Then capacity building is page 49. So looks like to me there's 3 major categories within that. Whoops, and then there's data collection and tracking on page 51. So there's 4 major components on that. Whoever's running the PowerPoint, if you could stop sharing, there you go. Thank you very much. So for the transition plan, I'm going to ask Jim McNeese if he could be unmuted. Okay, Jim, you're good, because I think you'd like to make the motion.
Well, before I make the motion, I'd like to say that this was a pretty extensive and thorough job that Brett and SEAC went through to come to this plan. It has short and long-term goals, and Brett, you have taken on a really big task, and one that will serve kids well into the future. So thank you for that, and thank you for SEAC's leadership on that. I'd like to move that the Kansas State Board of Education act to approve the SEAC plan for implementation of the Transition Task Force recommendations as presented.
Okay, so we have a motion, Jim Porter, and Jim, do you have comment you'd like to make? Yes, so if you could unmute Jim Porter. Okay, Jim, you're good.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to point out this has been a long process, and it has involved a lot of people and a lot of agencies that don't normally talk to each other. And so I've been really pleased with the fact that this has been brought together. I'm extremely pleased with the work that SEAC has done after it's been presented to them, and I am happy to second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to ask the state board to approve the SEAC plan for implementation of the Transition Task Force recommendations. Any further questions or discussion? Okay, Steve Roberts. Okay, Steve, you're unmuted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be voting no because I think this is more of what we've been getting from government in general over the last several decades. And we need to be far more nimble than this 15-page table. I'm sure a lot of work went into it. It's just that I've been privileged to be out and about with people who have lost their jobs, or my income went down 90%, and we're not being as nimble as we need to be. So out of a philosophical point of view, as much as anything, I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, I'm going to call for a vote to approve the SEAC plan for the implementation of the Transition Task Force recommendations. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, opposed? Okay, it's 9-1. Steve Roberts vote in opposition. I would assume, Bert, we'll get updates as you move along on this transition also within maybe your SEAC. Okay, all right, very good. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate, and please, I'd say Jim and Jim, please thank the transition groups as they've done a lot of work on this, and I know there's a lot of work yet to go forward, but there is, having worked in schools and know a little bit about transitions from that point, this is a very good thing. to move forward with what we can do to help support our students as they transition to the next phase in our life. So thank you very much. Okay, our next agenda item. We're moving to item 14. Now, I actually find this very exciting. I know this isn't all of the recommendations we thought we'd get this time, but Jeanette has a nice chart that shows you where the rest of the recommendations are. We've got some coming, I think, in July, and then another batch in November. And this is an example of how we've had to adjust and adapt with our pandemic, as it has changed some of when the recommendations are coming in. But we do have 4 right now, and I think this is exciting. We are receiving the Accreditation Review Council recommendations for KISA, and it's, I believe, on 4 districts. So Jeanette is here, and we also have a ARC member that will be here also. So I think I'm turning it over to you, Jeanette.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner Watson. I'm here to present to you today and share with you the process that the ARC took to review these systems, as well as to have you receive the 4 systems at this point as well. We have, like you indicated, Kathy, an ARC member with us that will be joining us shortly, I assume, and also Michelle Miller is with us, our director for teacher licensure and accreditation. So we're all here to be able to answer any questions that you might have. I want to just start off initially by just indicating that you do have, like Kathy said, a listing of the systems that will be accredited this year and in which order they will be received by you. You'll have some in July, and then you'll have the majority of them in October, I believe, when they will come in for your October, November, for your review. We're hoping to be able to get all the reviews done before the end of December, so that we would only have to worry and consider all the new ones coming in for next year, which we have 69 for next year coming in. So I know that those are quite a bit. We had initially, the ARC reviewed 6 systems back in April. You were receiving 4 of those 6 systems. 2 of them were pulled back because they required more conversation and a little bit more discussion. We believe that these 2 systems coming to you in July with the other 4 of them will probably, these 2 that we have pulled back will probably be systems that will be recommended for conditional accreditation. I'm just giving you a heads up on that at this point in time. So when that documentation comes to you, you probably, whoever the board member is for those districts or those areas, might want to take a closer look to them. This year in the fall, we had all of our ARC members really take a look at all the 30 systems coming through, and they did a preliminary check with the data that they had, those reports that were currently in the system back in the fall. And so with that, we assigned a lead reviewer, if you will, to each of those systems. When they came back now in April, I separated them into 3 groups. Each group had their lead school that they were reviewing, and they had that discussion with those ARC members. Once those ARC members had that first review, that review went to a second group. So there was a two-part review process to confirm or ask questions about what that first group looked at, saw, and if they had any concerns, they had the opportunity to have some back and forth conversation about that. After that process had taken place, we came back as an entire group, and they took a vote in terms of the recommendation for you as for for the board. Those systems, the process was that those systems then were sent to the system. The accreditation recommendation was sent to the system. It was sent to the board president as well, per your request from the previous meeting in March. So each board president also received a copy of that recommendation, and then they were asked to either accept or appeal that decision. Once we ended up accepting, we ended up receiving that information, then it was sent to you for a review and a receive item. So I think that's pretty much the gist of the process right now. I will just open up if you have any questions. I know that one of the questions that might be foremost on your mind is that if this has taken this long at this point in time, what's going to happen when we get to the 200 and somewhat in 2022? I think that has been kind of a yearly concern, not only for you as a board, but also for us as an ARC and as KISA staff. And all I can say about that at this point in time is that this review this year and next year are critical for that 2022 year. The calibration that has to take place is critical if we are going to be able to review these systems with the care that requires and the in-depth review. We have also begun back mapping all of our forms so that the review process for the ARC can be simpler. And so we're hoping that that will be in place next year, and we'll know how well or how much smoother a transition of those reports will come through next year when we get those 69 and we have backward mapped them. So with that, I'll just open up.
I think, why don't we ask, is Beth Sandness, if I've said that right, she's your ARC member?
Yes.
If she'd like to share a few things with us just about the process, because she's on the ARC, and I think it would be nice to hear from somebody who's on that committee and not necessarily part of the department, no offense. But
no, absolutely.
Yeah, so, and Beth, I believe you're unmuted. We can't see your picture, but that's okay if you are unmuted, so go ahead.
All right, well, thank you very much for letting me come in and visit with you all about the process that we've gone. I've been on the ARC since they started, and we started having these meetings. It's been a little bit different for us doing Zoom meetings as well. I know you guys are used to that now. I will go with what Jeanette said, that we are really working to backtrack with what we are looking for in a chair report, all the way back to what are we looking for from the system, so that it will make it easier when we get to 200 at a time. We spend a lot of time working with the newer members of the ARC too, to kind of catch them up with where we're going forward, as far as making sure that we do have enough people in the process that everybody's opinion gets heard and lots of questions asked. I will say that's the one thing that I really like about the ARC, is that everybody has a thought and can ask a question from a different place, because we do have teachers, we have administrators, we have superintendents, we have legislators, and we have people from outside. So everybody kind of looks at things from a little bit different place than all the rest of them. So it kind of brings a much better, robust conversation when we're in a district. So with that being said, the ones that we're bringing to you, we have hashed out back and forth with multiple daily meetings, as well as multiple meetings, our small groups in and out, back and forth, sending back emails, sending back conversations, asking questions. And I would feel comfortable telling you that the ARC, having voted on all of these, feels comfortable in the position that we have sent them to you. Take a look. We would also welcome any conversation from you guys and questions, so that then I can help take those back to the ARC as well.
Thank you very much, Beth. I think it helps to hear from an ARC member. And I believe Michelle Miller would like to make a few comments. Michelle, okay, you're unmuted, Michelle.
Thank you. And I appreciate Beth coming in to take the time to visit with you all. You're right, Madam Chair. It makes a huge difference for you all to hear from her. I want to give kudos to the ARC. Remember, those are members from the field who review these districts, who review these systems voluntarily. It's a great learning opportunity for them. But Jeanette and her team, David and Stephanie, Lynn as well, have really, with intention, met with them over the course. They did not drop the ball on this process that was being needing to carry through this process and bring you these systems. It would be helpful to them, to us today, if you would ask the hard questions about these systems that you have for review in front of you now as we move forward. So happy to entertain those questions from you all. It helps us in our learning and in our understanding of what's most important to you all as you approve these in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Okay, let's take questions from anybody who these districts are within your district first. So I don't know if anybody, if they are folks in your district, if you have any questions you'd like to ask. I'm looking to see if I see any. Okay, seeing none, let's open it up to any board members who have general questions. Ben Jones. Okay, Ben, you're unmuted.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was reading through theirs and I was looking at USD 259, our biggest system in the state, and maybe you can speak a little bit to it. That when you look under their social emotional learning piece to their accreditation, it talks about school safety pretty exclusively. Just school safety, about you kids feel safe at school. I don't know if that's physical safety or emotional safety or what it is, but just kind of by the messaging of it, it seems more like controlled entrances and the physical safety, active shooter sort of things versus kind of what we've been seeing and what we've been messaging with the social emotional learning. That if somebody wants to speak to that, and maybe I'm just horribly misguided, but that's kind of what it really talks about there. But it was very detailed in the rest of their systems regarding graduation rates and all that stuff. But I was wondering if someone can speak to that.
259 has, sorry, Jeanette, 259 has been an interesting process. And when you bring up the word safety, you're right, that's all encompassing of many things, social, emotional, personal safety, et cetera. They are our largest system, and I've been so honored to have built a relationship with them throughout this process, opened the doors. I think Jeanette would agree with me as well that they have been fully engaged, fully transparent, inviting us in to be able to have great conversations with them. Jeanette, do you want to speak to that issue of safety in regard to the social emotional piece?
You know, it's really interesting that you end up saying that. One of the things that we have realized is how we need to kind of refine some of these reports, because I know that as it's listed in terms of information, it might appear that that's the only thing that they have done, but they have been working on some of the social emotional aspects. They've increase some of their social workers, et cetera. It's just that it was not listed in there. And I think this is part of what I had indicated before, and that what Beth has said, as we try to back map these reports, we're going to be more purposeful in terms of what kind of questions get asked, so that it's not only the main piece or one main section of area for improvement, that we can just say, okay, in social emotional, what is the safety piece? What is the social emotional piece of the learning and that's taking place as well? So a lot of that has to do with how the questions were. And the only reason that I actually know that is because I was there at the time of the visit. And I do know that they did talk about some of their social emotional efforts that was taking place in the system. It was not reported that way necessarily. And that's probably just
as a result of how our reports are. So I just finished taking a note on that as well. We can always go back and make sure that, and that's part of receiving the item, that if you would like to have some more information, we can take that back and then add those pieces to the report in order to alleviate any concerns that there might be and to allow us for some clarity.
I appreciate that, and I would agree. When I saw Wichita, like the only thing they were focusing was on school safety, and not on anything else as a result of the report. And there was just one little sentence: second step curriculum is in its second year of implementation, versus that, but it was very detailed. So it came across, I mean, just upon reading it, like, oh, all they're focusing on school safety. That's not what we were after as a board. At least that's what I feel. That's not what we're after. And I think it's more than that. We're talking about social emotional growth, and what I see taking place in other districts, especially regarding that, and that, and maybe looking at, how we. I appreciate you looking at how we can change that feedback and give us a little bit clearer picture, condensed picture, and clearer picture. And I know it's a challenge, and we're still working through it, but I definitely appreciated I think outside of that, I really appreciated 259's in-depth look at their goals and their outcomes that they have throughout the thing. And I think from that, it's a good place to look at. And I kind of wish, like, since we have Solomon Eudora right in front of us with them, that, it was more robust, because it seemed really small in comparison. Granted, they are smaller districts. Well, every school is a smaller district than Wichita, but by a long shot. But I appreciated that, and so just some feedback from my vantage point. I liked the outline. I liked the direction that outline was going from what we had the last time we went through this last year. So I like the added information. It felt like I got a more complete picture as to what we're going at, and that's just something to look at. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, other questions, other board members? Ann Maw? It's okay, Ann, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think the big gorilla in the room is academics, and I guess I'll just pick on Wichita because they are the biggest. We know this is what the legislature is going to look at, even though we have a broad range of things we're looking at. We have to look at academics, and so maybe Jeanette or Michelle, you guys can explain how we accredit a district when its results actually in several areas got worse the last 3 years instead of better.
Understood. One of the things that I had conversation with Dr. Watson, I've had conversation with Jeanette about is, I just typed in the chat with you all, so thank you for the opportunity. The goals that a system writes need to address your state board outcomes, and they are not there yet. They are getting there, and they are making that connection with more intention. And the area of academics, all things academic need to be visible in the system yearly report. You heard Jeanette talk about a backward map. When you question them, they can say, oh yes, here's our data on this. Oh yes, here's our data on that. Wichita, in the course of their 5-year cycle, has undergone some major change administratively at the large system level. And it's a good and a bad thing that in the last part of their cycle, their intention just kind of, the rainbows have opened, everything seems to be coming together for them. The work seems to be getting pushed down for a system that large to the teacher level, and they're seeing the intention on addressing those things. If, however, we were to say, push them back, or this gives them an opportunity to move forward and gives us an opportunity to watch that data, to look at them set new goals. And I believe you will see movement in that area, in the area specifically of academics, would be how I would address that. They know, they are aware, they have a super duper process now. And remember, it was process and product moving the state board outcomes that we ask for systems to be able to address. And Wichita has done that well for us. And I feel confident in what the ARC recommended to you all on their behalf.
Well, did they consider conditionally accredited rather than fully?
For, as far as the ARC is concerned, they did not consider conditionally accredited for Wichita. It was reviewed pretty thoroughly, I would say, by a number of individuals. And I think the reason behind that is that the Wichita is able to really talk about that they understand that their data is not good, but they understand what they need to do in order to move it. And they believe that they have started by putting a strategic plan in place that in reality they have not ever really had. I mean, I've worked with Wichita for a very long time, and I was kind of impressed actually with their strategic plan and where they were going. They understand, however, that that plan will not make any change in their data if it does not get pushed down to the teacher level. And so that is where they are going with in their next cycle. They're pushing everything that they're doing down to the teacher level. I think Wichita was one of those school districts that started. Remember, they've been in the process for 3 years only. I mean, they're coming in in their 3rd year. And they really debated on whether or not to push back for another couple of years or to just move forward and just kind of get this over with, knowing that they were still not there and that they could not show improvement on their data at this point in time. But they felt that for the sake of their district and their strategic planning, that if they did not complete and go make those changes now, that it would not kind of provide them with that fresh start that they were looking at and looking for at the teacher level. We did visit with teachers and they're excited. They really are. I mean, you could go and have many presentations from schools. And I will tell you that I had one. I mean, one of the presentations that they brought was pretty much kind of a PowerPoint and, you know, telling you. But the elementary and middle school that were presented, those teachers really spoke from the heart and what they were really wanting to do and how excited they were about this finally getting down to the teacher level. So I think with those kind of pieces, and seeing that they want to move forward, that was part of the reason for not suggesting them as conditionally accredited at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions? Randy?
Why don't you let Michelle go first? I'll go last, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, it looked like Steve had a question too. So
Okay,
Michelle and then Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at the Kansas School for the Deaf, I know they just had a very strenuous dual. They're looking for a dual accreditation because they just had one, but that we went through and being on the advisory council, they've already started making some changes that the outside team, you know, made, being as transparent as they are. I think they're working towards those goals. I know that we're seeing some, what do I want to say, some numbers that are lower on the math and ELA, and I think that they're, given the fact that they already had an accreditation process just this last year, I'm hoping that we'll see some changes there. I just want to make a comment that they're in the right direction on making some changes, and being on that advisory council has been very helpful because they have a lot of stakeholders that are very involved in that school, and they really want to see those students succeed, and they are in a different situations because a lot of those students stay there all week and into the weekend, and they're there at night, so it's a little bit different than our traditional school. So just want to make that they're working at making improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Steve Roberts. You're good, Steve. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I ask my questions, I want to give a shout out to Brother McNeese, who has pushed as hard as anyone to have concise executive summary sorts of information that we can look at. I think without Jim's leadership on this, we don't have a lot of what we have in front of us. So thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. My question is about the absentee rate in Wichita. It's listed as 22.5%. Two questions, really. One, I see the state average there, so it's much, much higher than the state average. So I want to know if this is among the highest in the state, the 22.5% chronic absenteeism rate for 259. But the other point, and this will take a little bit of digging perhaps, is how much of that 22.5 is in just a handful of schools that might have something closer to 40 or 50% rate to bring the whole average up to that high of a number. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes, that was one of the questions that did come up as part of the meeting when they were visited with their outside visitation team. And the answer is yes, that a lot of that comes from some particular sections and schools within that district, and that they are currently putting things in place to try to address some of those issues. That goes back to being aware of their data and looking more closely at their data than what they had in the past. So it is one of those things that as KISA staff for USD 259 and the data that they have, we will continue on looking at it and seeing whether or not there's any improvement throughout the years. And if not, we will have to be touching base with that school district to saying this is not changing. Why? What are you doing? What's happening? You're supposed to be moving the needle on this data, and right now with whatever plan you're having, it's not occurring. They have not taken that charge on as thoroughly as they've been trying to take the charge on of post-secondary success with their programs that they have been putting in place for those. And I think it's a balance that now that they have to end up learning how to deal with. And the caution, I think, that was presented to them of not going from one extreme without looking at your other end of the table, because they impact each other. So yeah, I don't know if it's the highest. I don't know if Randy or Michelle would know if it's the highest within the state, but I do know that it comes from certain schools within that district, particularly, and they are aware of it.
The fact that they are looking at their data with that level of intention speaks highly to Mr. Roberts. As you said, identify those specific buildings that need more work on that issue. Dr. Watson can tell you where they fall. Anecdotally, I will tell you, having worked with a Western Kansas high school with a chronic absenteeism rate of over 40%, that seems to be the light bulb moment where high school teachers and folks start going, okay, well, we can't teach them if they're not here. I'm so pleased that the state's providing that data for our systems and giving them that opportunity. It's the systems that look at you and go, we didn't know that you just want to stick your head in the sand. Not that that ever happens in Kansas, but Wichita is fully aware of that very point that you just made. And I believe in looking at their goals and their efforts, they are intentionally working to make improvements on that.
Other questions? Okay, Randy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, it's not the highest, as Michelle said, but it is too high. What you can do, and this is really, I think, instructive for you, when you look at the chronic absentee rate for a district or for a building, that is a pretty good indication, correlational, not causation, but correlational to high school graduation and post-secondary success. You can almost match that. So if in kindergarten and first grade, you're running a 25% chronic absentee rate, your graduation post-secondary success is going to be around 75%. I've done enough in looking at that. Not saying they're the same kids. I'm saying that's a correlation. I think the other thing, this discussion is exactly what you have to have about process and product, because this is what the ARC is doing. This is still somewhat new. This is what I know that Jim McNeese and Dina and Jim Porter And I'm trying to think if there was anyone else that were the legislative liaisons at the time the school funding formula was passed. Melissa Rooker has vacated the building, as we say, but Melissa Rooker sat on that committee that was part of that we would hold school districts accountable for new money through the funding, through accreditation. And Jim will remember those sessions very, very well that we sat through. So this is very important. And that's why this is a receive item and then a vote item, because you're going to get 60 days to discuss it, think about it, ask questions, ask more information before you're going to make a decision. And as Jeanette said, we're going to soon have some conditionally accredited school districts. For many people in Kansas, they're going to hear that as the kiss of death. It is not. It is that the state board says you have to improve on either process, product, or both. And I don't know what Jeanette and Michelle and the ARC will bring us. My guess is it will be both, that they have poor results and they didn't have a process that maybe they thought would get them there. So don't think that this process needs to be rushed in any way. Accreditation, in my opinion, is the top thing that you do. And it should be done with all due deliberation, with as much time as any of you need individually or collectively. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You bet. Just a couple of comments. First of all, yeah, those board members who gave feedback specifically about the reports to come to the board, I felt like these reports that came to us were readable. They showed process, and then you were able to look at product also. And I do think it's important that we do look at both. If you look at, and we just had 4 districts that were brought today. And if you look at those, you have one specialized district in the School for the Deaf, and Michelle talked about them. And, you know, are they where they want to be? No, but they have a process in place and they're getting better. And then you have the biggest district in the state, Wichita. And of course, Jim McNeese and I, having worked in the district, we could tell you which of those schools have chronic absenteeism problems, I'm pretty sure. But you know, in Wichita, they don't have the results they want yet. They know that, but they do have a process in place. And I'd dare to say Jim and I know they've been working really, really hard on that process. Then you have 2 other districts that are smaller. So I think we've got, even in this first 4, kind of a nice cross section of schools that are coming to us kind of for our first look. So I appreciate that. And then I know in July, we'll have another group of, it looks like about 8 of them. And, you know, there's some there that are, you know, we've got some high poverty districts. We have some that are not. So we have some variety coming there. And then again, the ones coming in November. So this is our first year to have really a big bunch. This isn't a huge bunch, but it's a big bunch. But I do appreciate the fact that I felt like the reports were helpful to me. And they were readable. So, and the work that the ARC has done, I know they're working really hard. So we appreciate that. And thank you for presenting these to us today and answering our questions. And I know there's more, and they'll be back next month for a vote. Am I correct, in May? Oh, well, this is May. How about June? They'll be back in June for a vote. And then we actually get the next batch in July as a receive, and then that vote will be in August, and then we do that again November, December, I believe. So this year's are kind of coming in 3 batches, which is okay considering what we're going through. So thank you, and Jeanette and Michelle, please thank the ARC, and Beth Son, thank the ARC for their work. Again, this accreditation is it is very important work that we do, and I really like the idea of looking at process and product both, because that's going to get us where we want to go, and the fact of these goal areas. Okay, so thank you very much. Yes, Randy.
I've just been alerted that the YouTube streaming has gone down because YouTube thinks that there's maybe a copyright issue. Kathy is working on it, but it may be a good time to take a break as not to violate COMA. and let her see if she can figure this out and then come back in about 15 minutes. Madam Chair?
Yeah, well, it's time for a break anyway, so let's see, we're at about 2:35, so let's come back. 15 minutes is gonna put us at about 2:50. Okay, all righty, thank you. Oop, there she is, okay. Looks like all board members are back. Sorry for that delay. I understand the issue, YouTube issue has been cleared up. Randy will probably give us a head nod there. I think we're okay. Yep, okay, all right, Linda, thanks for being patient with us. We had to get a little technical issue straightened out. You know how that is these days.
Well, I can totally understand that.
Yeah. Okay, board, we do have 2 items coming before us, 15A and 15B, and they will be to act on recommendations of the Professional Practices Commission. 15A begins on page 81, if you want to look at your agenda, and it will be a recommendation as far as suspension. So Linda, you want to go over that one with us first, please?
I'm happy to do so. So 15A, the Professional Practices Commission recommendation would be that the board would suspend the license of this individual. This was actually a settlement agreement that was brought before the PPC between, Mr. Gordon brought that before us on behalf of the Department of Education, and the PPC reviewed that settlement agreement and adopted its findings. It involved a charge and subsequent diversion agreement with felonies related to misuse of a computer.
Okay, board members, any questions for Linda on this item, or do we have a motion? Okay, Dina's raising her hand and I'll read the motion. It is moved that the Kansas State Board of Education suspend the license of 19-PPC-29 through April 26th of 2021, or until she successfully completes her diversion, whichever occurs later. That was the motion, right, Dina? Okay, and do we have a second? Jim Porter seconded. Okay, all in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Okay, that looks to me like a 10-0. Thank you, Linda. Okay, now the next item is 15B, and if you're looking in your agenda material, that starts on page 85, and this is to act on recommendations of PPC, and we have revocation and denial, a total of 6 cases. So Linda?
Sure. The first case, 19-PPC-14, would actually be a denial of application for a license, and the other 5 cases are all recommendations for revocation of license. In the case of the denial of the application, the person involved requested a hearing, but then at some point in the process just stopped participating in the proceedings. And for the 5 cases that involve recommendation of revocation, none of these parties requested a hearing. So we heard the facts as presented by Mr. Gordon, and it is our recommendation that those 5 licenses be revoked.
Okay, are there any questions, first of all, from Linda for any of these items? Ben Jones? And you're unmuted.
Unmuted. First of all, I want to say that we don't get a chance to talk about this much, which is a good thing. But one of these cases involves violence against a student in one of our schools, about one of the licensees, and I appreciate the work that PPC has done, that we have a proper fair system for teachers to go through, but that we uphold the safety of our students first and foremost. And I think we don't get a chance to talk about it, which is a good thing, because we don't have it happen very often. But unfortunately, we've had an episode, and I'm glad that we were able to act. And therefore, I move that the Kansas State Board of Education denies or revokes the licenses in the cases of 19 PPC 14, 19 PPC 35, 19 PPC 42, 19 PPC 43, 19 PPC 44, and 19 PPC 46.
Okay, we have a motion for these actions. Do we have a second? Dina Horst, seconded. Any further questions or discussion? Okay, if not, everybody raise your hand if you approve of this motion. Okay, that looks like a 10-0 to me. Linda, thank you very much. Appreciate you waiting for us as we worked through our little slowdown there on the process. But thank you, Linda, and hope you're doing well. And I don't
Take
know
care.
if see you next month or not.
Next month. Yeah. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Linda. Okay, next item is item 16, and this will be a report from the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee and an action item on extension of high incidence special education alternative pathway pilot. Looking to, oh, there's Michelle and Susan. There you both are. Okay, all right, they're both on. So Michelle, are you going to start us off?
I will. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner Watson. Good to see you all again. It's been an interesting day. I'm sorry I keep coming back to you. I really would be okay if I was not on your agenda in June, but I'm afraid I may not get that lucky. So to that end, I'm glad that Susan is joining us. As you can see, we're all diligently working from home to keep licenses issued in Kansas. And to that end, we would like to bring you a recommendation, a report, if you will, a bit from Teacher Vacancy and Supply. A lot of those committees have I would just had to put things on pause for a bit, and we're hoping to pick back up with some regular meetings in June. So Susan will talk with you about the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee extension on one of the pilots. However, I might also ask that you entertain the idea of, just as a reminder, you have the high incidence special education pilot. You also have an elementary pilot opportunity for Kansas candidates. And in light of circumstances in our world right now, it might be best that Susan make the recommendation that we extend both of those. I think the folks that are with us, Kathy as a representative from Teacher Vacancy and Supply, would be okay with that. It's not as beneficial on the elementary side as it is the high incidence. So Susan, I will turn this conversation over to you. If you aren't currently unmuted, someone will unmute you so that you can begin. I appreciate you being here, Susan.
You're good, Susan. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. I thought first I better give you a quick reminder on the pilots and their design. For those of you who might have forgotten some of the details, but in the spring of 2018, the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee recommended to you, the state board, a 2-year pilot of alternative licensure pathways that we called the Limited Apprentice Pilot. And the board approved this. And as Michelle said, there were the 2 pathways, one for experienced special ed paras to achieve the high incidence teaching license, and the other pathway was for elementary candidates. And just a reminder of the requirements, these were all individuals who already held a bachelor's degree. The intent was that the district would identify these persons that they thought would be very successful. They were provided with a 2-year plan of study for completing the program, either high incidence or an approved elementary program. And then the pilot said, after certain first semester requirements, after those were completed, then we would issue a limited apprentice license. A mentor would be assigned. They would continue to be supported by their district and the university. And then they teach while they complete the program during the 2 years of their limited apprentice license. And we did allow new cohorts actually enter the program every semester as they finish their first semester requirements. So currently our numbers, we have 269 currently in force limited apprentice license. So that's a fairly good number. Of these, only 55 are for the elementary ed. And so that leaves about 214 that are the high incidence. So when we designed the pilot, we said we're going to do a formal evaluation process at the conclusion of the 2 years. So this semester is that end of the 2 years. And the idea being that then the evaluation results would be vetted through the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee and the Standards Board, with then final recommendations on maybe tweaks on the programs. But anyway, recommendations regarding continuation of these pathways would be forwarded to you, the state board, for action. Dr. Amy Gomer Erickson with the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning did conduct the formal evaluation process starting in late winter. That was this winter of 2019. And then throughout early spring of 2020, this spring. She did complete a written report, and that was delivered to us on March 23rd. So due to all of this timing and circumstances surrounding the whole COVID virus, we have not had a chance to work with Teacher Vacancy and Supply or Standards Board on any of those final recommendations. So therefore, we are asking the state board to approve a continuation of the pilots by allowing an additional cohort to start through the summer of 2020. So what this will do would be provide LEAs the opportunity to go ahead and select qualified candidates to fill next school year's positions, because these candidates then would be able to go ahead and enroll in and complete their first semester requirements this summer, meaning they would then qualify to be issued the license at the start of the school year. And then, of course, finally, that will also allow us to continue to work with TVSC and Standards Board throughout the rest of this summer and have final recommendations to you by the end of the summer. So one last thing, as Michelle said, your board materials originally asked for approval of an extension of just the high incidence. And it was simply because it was perceived that elementary candidates wouldn't really be able to complete that first semester requirement this summer, because it requires them to do an 8-week supervised field experience, a classroom field experience. But it's been brought to our attention that there is a small cohort of elementary candidates who will have the opportunity to complete that field experience this summer. And so in order to accommodate that little cohort, we would therefore request approval of an extension of both the elementary and the high incidence pilots. And then looking ahead, were provided with a little bit of a summary of the evaluation project with your board materials, and we expect a full report on the evaluation final recommendations to come to you hopefully later this summer.
Okay, Michelle and Susan, thank you very much for that update. Okay, board members, anybody have questions about this? Although it's not based on the data of the full research, it is a vote of the extension of the pilot, which would then allow districts to go ahead and hire people, which they're in the hiring process right now, and they could hire people through the special education, high incidence special education limited apprentice, plus the elementary pilot also. So questions, board members, for Susan or Michelle? Ben Jones.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is I've received some messages from superintendents and special ed directors about the importance of this pilot program. And so I'm going to vote to support it. But my question of clarification, is it just an extension essentially to the beginning of the school year, like through the summer, before a longer extension or a permanent placing? I mean, I guess without the recommendation, what's the future looking like?
So this allows systems to hire candidates who can begin their coursework this summer for the special ed pilot and begin their work in August. The reason why the elementary one is not quite that easy, they need classroom observation hours before they can come into and receive their limited apprentice license. And I can't make any prediction as to what that's going to look like. But this allows us some flexibility, some grace, if you will, some opportunity for hiring candidates such as these for this next school year, while we can more intentionally come together, review that data, and make a better recommendation to you all that gives our higher ed institutions time to develop programming more aligned to the coursework that these candidates would need to go into the classroom. Does that answer your question, Mr. Jones?
Sort of.
Okay.
So just for clarity, we're extending it for the cohort to start this summer for the high incidence special education limited apprentice, with a recommendation for a longer term extension or removing or making it a permanent way to licensure, potentially with the recommendations of the TVSC and the Professional Standards Board by the end of the summer. Is that correct?
Basically, we're asking you to support one more cohort so that we can bring you a better recommendation for a permanent opportunity.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at. What's the long road? Because it's not good to approve something temporarily than to let it die. That just doesn't make sense.
No, our intention was to have come to you now or in June to say this is our long-term opportunity for continuing this program that is not a pilot, but in light of everything that has happened, one more cohort for the pilot gives us a little more time to bring people back together in light of everything that has happened, so we can bring you a greater recommendation for continuation.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, if not, do we have a motion? Oh, Randy has a question or comment.
So Michelle, can you give an approximate just number just for the board of those that have participated in the high incidence program, and how much did that cost the state of Kansas to do that program? Susan knows what I'm getting at when I mention that. So.
I can give you the numbers again.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Go ahead, Susan.
Currently, we have 269 that are currently valid, but there's also some that have been successful and completed their program already and moved on to another kind of license. So those are great numbers when we compare them to our restricted that's been in place is comparable numbers. So it's been very successful, and it cost us $0.
When I point that out because obviously sometimes agencies come and want state funded to produce teachers of record. Here are a few universities in Kansas that push the boundaries of what we were trying to do in a pilot and produced almost 270 candidates without any state funding going to them at all. I think that's a pretty good return on investment. That's a commentary on my part.
Hey, board members, do we have a motion? Ben Jones?
There you go.
There you go.
I move that the Kansas State Board of Education approve an extension of the high incidence special education limited apprentice pilot and the education pilot, question mark. Are we doing that?
Elementary.
Elementary pilot, by allowing a new cohort to start through the program summer semester of 2020.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second? Dina Horst. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, opposed? Okay, so we have 9-1, Steve Roberts voting in opposition. Okay, Michelle and Susan, thank you very much for that report. And I'm sure we'll hear back from you after this goes through teacher vacancy and professional standards sometime in the fall anyway. Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, board will move on to consent, and in consent, we will be acting on initially items 17, except for H, I, and J. So could I have a motion that we approve the consent item minus H, I, and J, and Dina Horst made that motion. Do we have a second for consent? Jim McNeese. All in favor of approving consent minus H, I, and J, please raise your hand. Okay, just a second, keep your hand up. Okay, opposed? Abstain? Okay, we have a 9-0-1 with Steve Roberts abstaining. And then H, I, and J. Michelle, you requested those be pulled. Do you have comments that you'd like to make? He's working on it, I can tell. There you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just felt like I made my comments at the very beginning on with kids being out of school, not knowing what our future holds, spending money on some of these programs. I feel like needs to be tabled at this time, and so I vote no. I will vote no on H, I, and J at this time. Thank you.
Randy, do you want any explanation on these three? These are H is the preschool age at-risk programs. I is the Kansas preschool pilot grants, and J is the Kansas parents as teacher grants. So any explanation for us on these, please?
These are state-funded programs. So the money for all of these flow through the Kansas legislature. They are appropriated to these specific funds. They cannot be used for any other purpose unless the legislature would rescind the law, the governor would sign it, and then they could be repurposed for another use. But when it comes to us, we have to use that money as it was statutorily said to use it. So in the case of H, the pre-K at risk are commonly called the 4-year-old at risk. That's the number of students that meet a criteria that allows them to go to for preschool at no cost to their parents. The Kansas preschool pilot program are grants that private and public entities can apply for, and then be access to those grants. And then parents, teachers, I think many of you know that program. That's an in-home parenting program that assists parents for any school district that wants to have it, to try to help how do you raise young kids. They also have play groups, where they might bring parents together, but primarily it's home visitations and then trying to help young parents or old parents on how to handle kids. So the legislature appropriated money for those three items, and that's why it was brought to for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Okay, Jim McNeese, do you?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we approve H, I, and J?
H, I, and J on 17, yes.
Of the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a motion? We have a second. Dina Horst. Okay, all in favor of approving 17, H, I, and J, please raise your hand. Okay, opposed? And abstain. Okay, so we had 8, 1, and 1. Michelle Dombrowski is opposed and Steve Roberts abstains. Randy.
Apologize, Madam Chair, but on the pre-K pilot, that also has a combination of what's called TANF funds that are targeted needy assistant funds. Governor Brownback first accessed that for that pilot. So it's a combination of funds, and not that go into that, again, state program authorized by the legislature. So I apologize for not being a little clearer on that funding source.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 18, which is legislative matters. And my gosh, we are ahead of schedule. How about that? I didn't think that happened.
Don't speak or we'll have a copyright violation and we'll have to shut down.
Okay, Dale is up.
Okay. This is unusual.
Really?
I'm unusual year.
Needless to say.
And the President of the Senate between now and the 20th. I give this to you in writing if you want it. And some of it just happened since we started our meeting. The Senate President has called 4 committee meetings: the Commerce Committee, Tax, Judiciary, and Insurance. The House Speaker has called 4 committee meetings, and they're not the same. They're Appropriation, Commerce and Labor, Taxation, and Judiciary.
I bet your phone rings all day long, Dale.
Yeah, I quit last night at 9 though.
Good.
Here's what I wanted to ask you. Those meetings, they're going to meet between tomorrow and next, and they'll meet again on through now and the 21st. Here's what's interesting. The Senate committees you can't get in the State House. The Senate committees will meet in committee rooms. The House committees will be all Zoom or electronically. They will not be in the State House. And so that'll be interesting. The other thing is that will be interesting to see how this turns out. You remember that there's 826 million they cut this year's revenue, and next year's revenue is like 445 million for a total of 1.2 billion plus. Well, through the CARES Act, federal law, the governor has $1.2 billion plus to allocate out for things related to pandemic. The $100 million will go to Sedgwick County because of their size by law. 115 will go to Johnson County because of their size. That leaves the governor a little over $2 billion to spend for different things. The legislature, in some of these committee meetings, particularly appropriations, they would like to offer suggestions to the governor how to spend it. But I don't know how that's going to work out. And bear in mind, though, it would be in a bill form, and the bill would go to her to approve or disapprove. So she'd have veto power. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. In addition, about all the federal money has got to be tied to the pandemic. You cannot use it for surplanting. Now, they come up with some new rules from Treasury. And the new rules would seem to say that you have more flexibility on public safety, which includes corrections and hospitals. So there could be some surplanting there. The issue that I'm worried about, woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this, and I've already talked to the budget division about it, but this is big to us and to our schools. How much do you think free lunch applications will go up on September the 20th this year compared to last year? Think about that. It'll go up, no doubt. When will we open up? And so this morning we worked on that a little bit, and if it goes up 10 percentage points. Now see, take a look, for example, Kansas City, they probably won't go up 10 percentage points. Kansas City is 75, 80% now. But others, you'll see a substantial increase. But 10% costs 45 million. And this is important. We believe that the money that the governor received through the pandemic allocation, that roughly $1 billion left, can be used to help pay for the increase in free lunch as a result of the pandemic. Unemployment rates have really jumped. I don't mean a little bit, but a lot. And so what will it be in September? It remains to be seen. We don't know that, but we believe, and nobody's reviewed that except us, we believe that it will, that can be paid with some of that $1 billion the governor has. Now, you think through that just a little bit. I want, for each increase in a pre-lunch kid, it will cost us $2,211. That don't count high density at risk, and that'll go up also probably at least 10%. And that's districts between high density, between 35% free lunch and up to 50. So we've got that cooking, and it'll be interesting to see what the committees do this week. The other important thing is the legislature is only going to be there one day, May 21st, called Sine Die. That's the end of it. And so May 21st will be Sine Die. And not very many things can you bring up in both houses, get them approved in both houses, signed off for in one day. So the things that goes on the agenda for discussion and approval will be thought through very carefully by leadership. Other thing I want to mention, Mr. Porter will remember some of this, and so will Dina. Remember right at the tail end of the session, the regular session, why we had a lot of bills that were lumped into to another bill. Some cases, as many as 4 bills put into one. And usually what they did, they lumped them in to a good bill that most people support with something that they wanted that maybe they wouldn't support. I mean, it's just truthful. And so one controversial one would be they put the tax credit low income scholarship in with the bond fund, with the bond interest expansion. Well, that costs money, so that probably won't go anywhere. They also, on vision screening, wasn't a big deal. They dumped 4 more bills into that, and that would include like the Wichita's authority to, which they requested for non-CTE students to attend higher ed, and they were willing to pay for it. Expansion of ACT, bond interest state aid, and so a lot of things was dumped in there. And there's some of them are no price tag, others got a price tag. Those with big price tags, they're in trouble, just flat fact. So there's several evidence-based best practices in land and publishing all that. So with we'll never get that perfect. Never get it perfect. The hard as we try, because there'll always be something out there that we didn't know about. But anyway, and that has not been approved, and that's another one that's on the calendar. So those bills, a lot of them are controversy. There's some money attached to it, and they probably will not go anywhere. And if you are interested, I think I said this earlier, if you're interested, I can give you a little email, and Randy can send to you, and it shows the date and the time of all the committee meetings starting Wednesday through next, it ends on the 20th. So if you're interested in that, the time and the dates and so forth, we'd be glad to send them to you if you're interested.
Yeah, Dale, why don't you go ahead, and I'm sure some board members would be interested. Go ahead and make sure.
All right. I anticipated that, so I'll send it to Randy as soon as I get off, so he can forward. The other thing I wanted to mention is that We have several applications that are ready on small programs, safe and secure schools, mental health expansion. We can't send those out yet. We don't know what the legislature may do on the 21st. If we knew what, it's pretty much ready to go, but you can't send it out. But schools do all that. They do all the application, all the work on that. And then maybe we may not get the money. The big issue is we can probably end this year, and you'll get different opinions on this, but $250 million. We're not bad this year. But I'm telling you, next year there's a big deficit. And when they return, probably the day or two before or the day of, the governor will issue her budget amendments. That hasn't been decided yet, but she'll give her budget amendments. And her goal will be to balance the budget next year. And that won't be easy. I do not believe, unless if it's humanly possible, she'll cut general state aid, LOB state aid. The governor has been supporting that all along. She will leave that to last. I don't believe she'll cut that unless positively she has to. I think she can fund the increase in that risk because of the pandemic with the CARES money. So that just be my opinion, that she's, based on her history, she will not cut that unless she just positively has to. The other thing is, in all that, my guess is, and this is she's recommended this before, she'll cut capers back because she wants to spread that over a 20-year period. Remember, actuarially, she was in her budget last year. She wants to cut that and that big chunk and then spread it over a 20-year period. I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't looked at, because that's what she's done before. Randy, I think Craig's on. Is there anything I've overlooked or forgot about on all that? Are there any questions?
Okay, we've got a question from Ben Jones.
All right, real fine. Ben?
Yeah, I received some grumblings among some of the sped world because since we shut down about mid-March, that some of the budgets for sped that were being used by Medicaid dollars, they're not getting because they're not doing those kids. What is that looking like? I mean, what kind of gap are we looking at there? Is it an issue? Is it not an issue?
Yeah, it's an issue. It's an issue, Ben. That's a great question. I don't know. They get about 25, 30 million a year, so you're going to be short. You'd be short maybe $6, $7 million out of $5 billion. Yes, but it'll be short. That will be in special ed. But bear in mind, remember last month we talked about this. We plan to give. We have access. The board does to about $7.5, $8 million. And remember last month we talked about that. That will be distributed. The plan is for special ed on amounts per teacher. So Ben, we think we'll more than make up for the loss of Medicaid with distributing the little bit we have control over out on the special ed formula on an amount per teacher, about $500 a teacher. So we think that they'll break even on that.
Okay. I know it's been a concern because I've had some grumblings among sped teachers, not directors or administrators, but teachers that they're going to lose paras and stuff like that because of the lack of funding.
Well, I believe they'll break even because I think the loss of Medicaid funding can be made up with this CARES money that'll be distributed. It'll be, Randy, I remember about $7.5 million, about roughly what we got there, $500 a teacher. So we'll pretty well make that up. And the calls we're getting is special ed directors. They're nervous of frog on a freeway, and they have reason to be. It's reason to be, should be. But I think it'll compensate, make up for it.
And that doesn't include the money that schools already got in Title I, correct?
No. And bear in mind that federal money for under the CARES Act, it is distributed under the Title I formula but it is not Title I money as such, but it's on that formula, and that's about $75 million. That's close. It goes out. So good question. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Dale. Am I on? There we go. In the interest of flexibility and the unknowns, a lot of folks are going to be thrown out of work, a lot of businesses closed. And I came into this meeting thinking that we had a little more authority maybe than we do. Maybe we could say that try to start your schools in mid-August, but no later than September 8th. That's before Randy explained what the statutory authority really is. So here's my question. Might there be a way that we could successfully and legally craft an opportunity to start truly integrating competency-based outcomes or competency-based credentialing, or a way that we can get away from the, whatever it is, was it 1,116 hours? Is that the magic number?
Yeah, the law provides a minimum of 1,116 hours. It's set out by statute, and it's 186 hour days for 1,116 hours, and you are correct. That's set by the legislature. And this year, remember, they authorized a waiver, and they gave you permission to approve the waiver, which you did. When was it? When did we do that? March?
But that was just for a 30-day deal, wasn't it? Till we met.
That was for this school year. This school year. And they can apply for the waiver on the number of days that they had to miss.
Well, and looking big picture, I wouldn't doubt. Now, you might remember the WPA from the 30s. I probably not, but Janet might. But the Works Project Administration was something that the government used to put people back to work. And I've heard some wealthy industrialists and people with a lot of money, billionaires, Mark Cuban comes to mind, suggesting that might be something that the government does. Now, if they do, if they come up with a project, it would seem to me prudent to welcome the public into our schools to participate, as well as having this outcome-based or competency-based award of credits, and that could save us a lot of money. Is there a legal pathway to do that?
Okay, number one, if it has to do with teacher licensure or accreditation, you have some authority. If it has anything to do with money, you have very little authority, except maybe recommending distributing it according to their law. They control the money. You control licensure and accreditation. The one thing you got to remember, and there's some here that may want to give us an example of this. I know Scott Gordon's on or not, but when you adopt rules and regulations, you don't do that in a short period of time. It takes quite a period of time to adopt regulations, go through the hearing process. And a good example of that was there's some regulations you approved some time back that dealt with, I think, teacher licensure and with driver's ed, and they're not in place yet. So you'd have to allow it isn't something you're going to do in a short period of time. It takes time to do that. Randy, I believe those things have been in place a year, haven't they, or tried to in the process?
Correct.
So if you're going to change any rules or regs, a licensure or accreditation, you better allow at least a year.
Jim Porter.
Thank you. This is another issue. I met with a representative the other day who had heard from other representatives that they were looking at the opportunity to cut funding to schools because it was cheaper because we weren't in school. I met with the Greenbush South Superintendent's Group right after I got that information and asked them about that. And first of all, there were a number of reasons that they pointed out that it was actually in some cases costing more. For instance, there are places where the reimbursement for food service does not cover the cost, and so there's an additional cost for all these extra meals we're serving. Also, things like bus drivers are running their routes to deliver food in some cases. But the big one was to provide technology to everybody that didn't have it, and they found, in one case, they found out that most of their, since they use their technology at school, they had to provide microphones and headsets, and that was a significant cost. So I just wanted to say that to make sure that we know that that may be coming down the pike, and used as an excuse, when in fact, based on the anecdotal information I got, it is in fact not less expensive. It's still costing about the same to provide school, even though we're doing it remotely. I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that those comments were being made, and I just wanted to bring that up as a matter of information to my colleagues.
Well, and when part of the rationale, and I know Randy will correct me if I'm wrong, to allow us to waive the 11, 16 hours was that we pay everybody. You know, there's where most of your, 85% of our costs are there. And then you have additional food service costs. So yeah, it's pretty tough to see that there's been much savings in the schools at this point in time. Do we have other questions of Dale as far as legislative? I guess maybe, I know you're going to send out information to us on when those committee meetings are. And I don't know if the board would like maybe weekly, maybe Randy in your Friday notes, just a quick summary of what some of those meetings were and if there was anything we need to be aware of that might prove helpful for the board. Anything else for Dale or Craig?
I just remind you that May 21st, of course, the committees will meet prior to May 21st, but things will happen quickly. That's not unusual at the end of a legislative session. The end of this legislative session maybe is a little unique. So I know that Jim and Dean will be watching it closely, but the rest of you might want to watch that, and I'm sure your superintendents will. So you may hear things that happen that Dale didn't brief you on, because we don't know everything they may discuss when they come back.
And that meeting will be in the Capitol, correct?
Yes, and there'll be some challenges there.
Boy, no kidding.
I think there could be a few that may choose not to return.
Mm-hmm.
And also were they to choose to comply with the 6 foot distancing, social distancing on the House floor. That could be a challenge. Also, some of the Senate seats are side to side, so will they try to comply with that or ignore it? Don't know that. But I want to just comment briefly on what Mr. Porter mentioned. We've had several calls about that. Think about that, as Jim mentioned. All the salaries by law had to be paid. All hourly people had to be paid. The rest were all under contract. No savings there at all. And on top of that, food service in some cases was more than the reimbursement because they delivered it to some of the poor kids. They used buses to do that, as Jim said. The savings and so forth in that area will be insignificant. What's interesting on top of all this, the legislature is doing a post-audit study on cash balances. I'm telling you, those with cash balances, some boards are extremely proud. And they'll tell you that they got a little bit of cash right now because of the unknown. So anyway, any other comments, questions, words of wisdom?
Well, thank you, Dale, and thank you, Craig. I know you guys have been on the phone constantly and working with districts, and we sure appreciate that. So thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the chairman's report, and we'll do some committee reports. We'll start with those first. I know a number of committees have still been meeting mostly virtually. There was a Acacia Board of Directors meeting. So Jim McNeese, Dina, either one of you want to brief us on that information? Jim, you're already unmuted.
I'll let Dina start.
Okay. Dina, let's see. Yep, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Dina.
There were a number of items that are changes to the handbook that were discussed and passed by the board of directors, because that is their responsibility, is to make sure that handbook has all the rules and policy involved in it. One of the things that we did do also was to set up the timing that Randy was talking about earlier, when coaches could start, particularly basketball and football, when they could begin their practices and how they needed to operate in that arena, when they could start, how involved they could get in that practice. In other words, they couldn't just start having a 7-on-7, for example, the first day of practice. They have to do several weeks of conditioning before they can begin any of that. And we had a lot of concern from those counties that have had more issues than others, and we just felt that it was unfair to make put everybody under the same rule clear across the board. They haven't, particularly in some of the western counties, they haven't had the issues. And so some of the eastern counties were feeling like they were going to be at a disadvantage. But we were reminded that coaches generally are more concerned about what the end game is than when they actually are beginning as such. So, because there's injuries and all sorts of things. So, being ready for the state playoffs may not look the same for that group that got to start early. So anyway, it's not until after June 15th, I think, isn't that when the governor, her last days. Anyway, it can't start until phase 4 actually starts. So all of that is, in fact, it was written up in newspapers, so some of you may have actually read the specific details of it. But that's what I'll let Jim take over from there. He can maybe be a little more specific about classes and so on, what the decision was for each of those in the handbook.
Well, you know, the Activities Association is just a microcosm of the decisions that we have to make or are facing in terms of starting school. One of the dates that you might want to just check in your calendar is August 17th. August 17th is the first day of fall sports season, you know, when they can start their official practices. And then earlier than that, there are some dates that deal with, you know, when they can meet in camps and how often and all. So, but really August 17th is going to be the big one. And big argument is, what if Johnson County and Finney County and Ford County and Sedgwick County are still fighting the COVID-19 virus, and, you know, Sumner County and Coffee County aren't. You know, do we let some schools start, you know, practicing, or do we make everybody wait? It's the same discussions we're having, you know, in terms of all schools. And the number one thing that should be driving our decisions is the safety of the students, first of all, and then the safety of our staffs and the safety of our communities. But there was a lot of discussion about, you know, if just because maybe Johnson County can't start, why can't I start? I'm in Sherman County. We're way out there. Nothing's happening in our county. You know, so good luck. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Dina, you got something else?
Yes, I was just going to say I'll write up something and make it more specific so you all have more of a idea of changes that were made and so on, and I'll email it to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Ben, I think you had an ag in the classroom. Anything to report from your group?
There was a planned summer conference in July, but that has been canceled for several reasons. Mainly no facility, because they were using extension, and K-State has closed all their campuses till August 1st. So, and that includes all extension offices, in case anybody was wondering. So that kind of led to that. So looking at next summer, they are in the process of hiring a new executive director. In fact, they interview on Friday this week. There's some changes there. They've been doing a lot of online push. The Ag Teacher of the Year nomination forms are out there. This is kind of a PSA that if you have a teacher using agriculture to teach Kansas standards, or an ag teacher, period, they're welcome to be nominated and submit an application. They're due June 1, I believe, to get in there and get some recognition. It's some pretty awesome stuff using agriculture in the classroom. So that's some of the updates they've been doing. Been doing some virtual farm tours, and both hog, beef, and that sort of a dairy tour, partnering with other ag entities, Farm Bureau, Midwest Dairy, beef, Kansas Beef, and that. So they've been working really hard, trying to provide materials for teachers to use remotely, as well as transitioning internally as well.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. We also had a school redesign advisory committee meeting that was done online. Gosh, seems like, Ann, it was a week or so ago. Do you want to report on that one, Ann?
Am I?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah. We had more than one group combined, so we really didn't get into too many specifics about redesign, other than that looks like, you know, a lot of the Apollo schools are going to delay. Some want to jump in the fall, but I think a lot of them will continue their training. They were just getting to the point where they were getting ready to go try some things this spring, and they didn't get to try those things. So I think we'll see a lot of the Apollo schools delay, you know, for at least another semester. It sounded like what probably will happen at this point.
We were supposed to go visit some schools this time, so needless to say, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But we did also talk about, you know, what we're seeing in redesign, what we're seeing with some of the things, those principles being integrated with some districts in the work that they're doing with continuous learning. So that was an interesting conversation also. So
yeah, that was pretty exciting, because it seems like a lot of schools now have been jump started into redesign, whether they wanted to go or not. And those schools that have been doing redesign, as was mentioned earlier in our meeting, they really transitioned quite well. They were already into individualized learning and some blended learning. So the ones that were doing redesign, I think, are doing very well with this homeschooling.
Well, and the deadline for Apollo 2 has been pushed back to, is it July something?
July.
So, those of you that are out there, and if you've got some of your districts that are interested, particularly if they're enjoying those components that Ann just talked about, the individualized learning and the personalized and the project-based stuff, you might encourage them to think about applying for Apollo 2, because that date, and Randy can give us the exact date, but I'm pretty sure it's I think it's maybe the middle of July. I don't remember for sure, but he'll tell us as soon as I be quiet. So
July
okay.
1, I believe
July.
it's July 1.
Okay.
And there was a school down in Mr. Porter's area contacted us as an example and said, the staff said, we're not going to go back the way things used to be. We've learned too much. So we're excited. We want to talk to you about redesign, because we've learned some things about our families and kids that we need to do better when we come back. So I thought that was instructive.
Okay. All right. Thank you. A couple things that I've been working on. We talked about teacher vacancy and supply. We did meet virtually last week, and it was certainly our recommendation to bring the thing that we voted on today to the board. So we'll be getting that data. I think we're scheduling a June meeting, but I don't know, and we'll see whether it's in person or virtually. So hopefully maybe we'll see that data before long. It also needs to go to Professional Standards Board, which Jim Porter's on that. So School Mental Health Advisory Council, we have been meeting online. We had our big meeting in April, and then we divided into committees, working on the bullying task force report. And I believe in June, we're going to give a full report to the board, not a full report, but a kind of where we are now. But what we've done is we've got about 4 subcommittees going. One of them's working on the bullying definition, because it was felt like, even from the task force recommendations, that there was, although Kansas has a definition of bullying in statute, it doesn't necessarily totally agree with the research definition. So there's going to be a recommendation that's going to come forward of how do we reconcile those 2 definitions, because maybe the recommendation is not necessarily to change statute, but to look at policy and how we can do things in policy. And then we also have a data committee that's looking at the data, because right now we get a lot of data from the Kansas Community That Cares survey. We all know some of the issues with that, the length of it, opt-in, opt-out, that's changed over the last several years. So we actually had a virtual subcommittee meeting, I think it was this last week, and we met with Greenbush, who is the contractor. I'm not sure exactly how that works with CTC. And we also had, I think it's KDADS, that is I might have that wrong, Randy. That is the group that, the state agency that funds that, and a few other groups. So we really had a really good subcommittee meeting, getting these agencies together, talking about some things that we can do, looking at data. Also on data, we're looking at, are there some teacher surveys that we need to do? Also, there's some other ways we need to look at data as far as bullying is concerned. And then the other 2 subcommittees, one of them is policies. What recommendations are we going to give to districts as far as policies are concerned? There is a policy, bullying policy, that KSDE has. So that, and we think most districts, their own district policy mirrors the one from KASB. So we're going to look at that. And are there other things we can do within policy? And then one of probably the big committees is resources. Looking, there's tons and tons of resources out there on bullying. Well, we want to make sure that our districts get things that are vetted, and in some regards don't cost a lot of money, if anything at all. And there's a lot of good materials out there. So the group that's working on resources, and then we have a subcommittee working on cyberbullying. And one of the things we're looking at on cyberbullying is, again, do we need to put a sub definition within the bullying definition as far as cyberbullying, because that's such an issue. But then also you have the issue of the cyberbullying may start off campus, but then do the impacts come on campus, and how do we support districts on how they deal with those issues? So there's some things within the definition and the practices that the cyberbullying subcommittees is working on. And then we're also looking at resources. Are there specific resources for the cyberbullying? And then also involved there is the training. How do we help not only students, but teachers and parents? Because a lot of that cyberbullying does happen off campus, and are there some training that parents need to know about? So there's a lot of things going on our various subcommittees, and then we will be meeting back together, we hope in person in July, but we all know that may be somewhat virtual. We don't know. So we'll report to you in June on our progress up to date. And then we hope to, by November, at least have some pretty good recommendations to bring back to the board as far as implementation pieces of these task force recommendations. So that's kind of my long-winded update for the School Mental Health Advisory Council. So Jim, question? Jim McNeil?
No, I don't have a question. Just on the communications team.
Yes.
We've been talking about taking a Western Kansas trip in the fall. For a lot of reasons, we'll just delay that until we see what happens in the future, probably next year.
Yeah, that's probably a wise idea. Yeah.
Plus, my wife said I couldn't go anywhere until I got a haircut.
Yeah, it's kind of why I'm waiting for phase 2. I'm ready to get trimmed up.
These gray wings.
Okay, do we have any other subcommittees? I think we've probably covered all of them. I think we're good on subcommittees. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mark, I think you probably have an update on us with negotiations for the School for the Deaf.
I did send out a quick summary, and we've exchanged letters, and we've worked on trying to categorize how how each of those topics can be addressed, and the negotiation, hopefully through study groups, through some agreement, and then through typical negotiation. And we have our first session with all of the members of both teams on Thursday from noon to 4. So
okay.
Nothing substantive yet to present. That's just kind of giving you the what's developed in the last month procedurally.
Thank you. Michelle, I just happened to think, has the vaping task force been working on anything since we've been kind of on this lockdown?
Mark and I were going to work with NASB on doing like a little documentary, or it was going to be a video type thing, an interview type thing, but that's been postponed. So right now they may be working in the subgroups on things with the medical field to get more information, especially with COVID. We were going to put some more information out to families, because that's so damaging to the lungs, the vaping is, and then you throw COVID on top of that, you've got dual problems. And so that's something that they were going to look at, and just let parents know if they get flu-like symptoms, upper respiratory, that if they're vaping, that's going to exacerbate that. So
that is exactly the question I was going to ask you. If anybody was looking into that, that might be
they are
to have any kind of a report on that. I just can't imagine there wouldn't be impact there, but
especially when we go back in the fall, and if something flares up again and the kids are and that could be something that they might want to take a look at as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, request for future agenda items. Again, let me, before I ask for that, June, we hope we can do what we thought we could do in May, which is maybe come back, some of us in the boardroom and some of us still virtually, because we'd have to keep social distancing. We just don't know, but I'm hoping that we can at least get some of us back in person. So we don't know right now if it's going to be a full day or a day and a half like usual. So, but request for future agenda items. Okay, we will move forward then. Chairman report. I think we've pretty much covered a lot. I don't know that I have anything additional at this point in time, except for, as I mentioned, the items that'll be coming up in the near future. We'll continue to keep you up to date on school mental health and where we go with the bullying task force recommendations, and also in school mental health. Maybe June would be a good time because the legislature will fully completed, but to see where the school mental health pilot, because right now they can still, I don't know that they'll do much with that, but I think we'll see whether and where that is for next school year when we get in June. So maybe we'll have a little bit of an update on that in June also. Okay, at this point, I would ask about board travel, and obviously we don't have a whole lot of board travel going on since we're not doing a lot of traveling. But Peggy, I think my mind's gone blank. I know you've sent something out, so if anybody has anything they want to add, Dina?
I have 2 Zoom meetings that are going to occur. One of them is a challenge award presentation on Friday, and then next Thursday, the Kansas Prescription Drug and Opioid Advisory Committee is meeting. And then in June, the 17th and the 18th will be a Acacia Executive Committee meeting. And we don't know whether that's in Zoom or whether it'll be person to person. They're hoping to bring us in, but we'll see.
Okay. Others? I know I do have, I think in June, we're going to do a teacher vacancy and supply, and you probably better put me down for some school mental health because there will be a couple days coming up soon on that. Jean would probably be teacher vacancy and supply too. Anybody else that we know of? Peggy?
Peggy, I can't unmute. There you go.
Oh, there you go. She got her now.
Sorry, I put a little note in, but fiscal, they always have an early deadline for anticipating any June travel. So if you could get that specific dates to me as soon as you can, because I'll have to, June 5th is our cutoff. So that's the last I can request any anticipated travel.
Okay. Well, and well, by June 5th, we should know what we'll be doing with the board meeting in June. Hopefully. Okay, anything else?
I think Jean had something.
Jean?
Yes. There's also a coordinating council meeting next Tuesday from 3 to 5. I don't know if you need to add that or if it's just.
Yes. Thank you. I missed that one. Thank you. And also, Randy, do we have a governor's education council coming up? No?
We did, but they canceled it.
Canceled that one. Okay. Ben?
I just sent the email to Peggy, but I have a challenge award presentation tomorrow. I think we approved challenge award stuff a couple months ago, but let's just make sure she got it. But it's with Emporia tomorrow night.
Okay.
Virtually, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Jim and I did quite a few virtual ones. Was that last Tuesday or a whole bunch in a row? It went pretty well. Anything else? Okay, do I have a motion to approve travel? Jim McNeese and a second by Michelle Dombrowski. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like a 10-0. Okay, all right. I think that's it for the good of the order for today. So 4 o'clock. Now you can all travel home. Okay, well, thank you very much, and everybody stay safe. We'll look for the Friday notes, but we'll also look, you've got some updates that will be coming, the information about legislative committee meetings. And Randy, you might include in your Friday note the link or information about those PBS links that Denise put on the website. That's an easier way. I know down in my neck of the woods, it's kind of, even though it's on PBS, they didn't always mark it very clearly. So
That is correct. It's not always marked as what it is, at least on the Wichita PBS.
yeah. So you might include the link for on the state board or the department's website, because those are just fabulous what's going on there. Okay, well, everybody stay safe, be healthy, and if we don't see you before, we'll see you at the June meeting, either in person or virtually. So thank you very much.